lo-fi music playing in the background. 90s lo-fi Valentine's night. Faye Valentine versus Cowboy Bebop. You know, I like my anime. You know, I like my lo-fi. Anime, lo-fi music. So that's what we're doing. But I'm about to turn it down because I don't want to get copyright claimed. But I guess that few seconds of it should be copacetic. So keep it about here. That should be good. All right. So, guys, this is going to be another late night philosophy. And I'm going to finish up what I did several days ago just because I enjoyed it. I enjoyed nerding out. I don't know if any of you like me nerding out. Um, but this stuff is actually helpful that I went over. So I want to keep doing it. All right. So for you guys who weren't here last time, I was going over logical fallacies. Okay. And got about halfway through. I'm referencing, for people who are interested, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which let me see if I can bring this up without, not on here. This is a vertical live stream. If I can bring this up for myself without having to miss the place where I saved it. Um, or no, I'll you know what? I'll just put on my glasses. That'll make it easier for both of us. And I'm gonna go into these logical fallacies and finish these up for you guys, and you can look at both of these back to back and use it as a guide. But I also recommend getting like some sort of book or bookmark a website that does this stuff. And like I said, this is the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. And I think the link to this is iep.utm.edu. Okay, that's the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. If you just want to Google that instead of putting in the URL, and there's other philosophy sources as well, really good ones. The Stanford, was it the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the Skeptics Dictionary, um, just and some many other ones. Those are the ones I recommend, and I would recommend getting a hard copy of some of these um, materials, like to get the Skeptics Dictionary. There's a hard copy of that, as well as how to become a critical. Be, what was the thing? Becoming a critical thinker, um, the power of reason, informal fallacies, the tools of philosophy. These are all books, by the way. Or like I said, you can just use their online equivalents. Thank you, Moonlit. Like no one gives a fuck, man. Like shut the fuck up about football. This clearly, clearly you didn't see the fucking topic. I don't give a fuck about football. Go football these nuts in your mouth. I was at 2000 watermelon. It went down. It happens. It's gonna go back up. Pause. But for you guys, I'm a nerdy person who just happens to be an athlete, a combat athlete. So I'm gonna go over logical fallacies. I did this few days ago, and I was thinking, do I want to come back to it or not? So I do. So I'm gonna come back to this. Yeah, Jacob is clearly on special ed time, looking at this comment that he left that wasn't shown. I'm not gonna even bother showing it showing it for the rest of the chat room because it will just lower you guys' IQ to let you see that. It's stupid. So Where I left off last time with the last live stream on logical fallacies, I left off at irrelevant conclusions. Okay, these are conclusions that's drawn that are irrelevant to the premises. It basically it misses the point. Okay, um, which is exactly what you say when someone says they're missing the point. That's an irrelevant conclusion. It's the same thing. So we're moving on, and again, I'm just going down the list like more or less alphabetically. Watermelon Bros 29 said trolls. I sub. Thank you, brother. So the next one is a relevant reason. And by the way, before I go into all these, the reason why I'm giving you guys these logical fallacies is one, as I've stated many times in some of my previous videos, I do want to promote critical thinking and skepticism, especially amongst people who don't often use these tools, even though they're so important in our day-to-day life. Like we're we're in the eight we move we're in the information age where we're at the crux of this stage where we're getting more information than we actually need, and we need ways to mentally parse this information for its to parse it for one its usefulness, that is the pragmatic part of it, and two for the veracity of it, which is the truth truth evaluating aspect of it. So to do that, we have to have like a healthy dose of skepticism. We have to use basic tools of critical thinking. And critical thinking skills doesn't take several years of doing formal logic or math or philosophy. Critical thinking revolves around one central thing, which is our the claims that we make and others make should have should have some sort of evidence to support them. They should be testable somehow. What's up, Patty? So eh, I'm gonna go through these. So guys, don't think I'm ignoring you, but I'm just trying to. I'm like I did last time. I'm just gonna go through the fallacies. Uh, so anyway, so the next one is a relevant reason, which is the fallacy. It's a type of non sequitur reasoning. Non sequitur just means is Latin for it doesn't follow. So the relevant reason is that we have some wiring that needs to be fixed. Um, this is why I mentioned an electrician at my place a week ago who almost got into a fight with some hood booger in my neighborhood to fix our electrical wiring. But I'm back. I'm sorry. So anyway, I'm gonna get back to where I left off. So I was saying a relevant reason is the one we're starting with today. Is a fallacy that's a kind of non sequitur. Non sequitur is Latin for it doesn't follow. Um, and the relevant reason is a fallacy in which the premises are wholly irrelevant to drawing the conclusion. And I was going to say, before I cut out, for folks who don't know what premises and conclusions are, premises are the assertions that are used as evidence from which to infer the conclusion. Okay, or draw the conclusion. The conclusion is the assertion that follows from the previous ones that are evidence for it. So there you go. Uh, and often these can be considered propositions, but that is a that is a probably a metalogical um, argument that we don't need to get into whether assertions should be propositions, statements, sentences. We don't need to get into all that. So, uh, anywho, um, sorry about that. So let me give an example of a relevant reason. So Laosia beer is the top selling beer in Thailand. So it would be the best beer for Canadians. What? That that's an irrelevant reason. Moonlit Fern says like, share, sub, and super chat, guys. Thank you. So the is ought fallacy. This is a good one. This is a good fallacy. This is one that's often made, particularly when people are making quasi scientific claims. um, so this one, right, is the is ought fallacy occurs when a conclusion expressing what ought to be is inferred from premises expressing only what is so, in which it is supposed that no implicit or explicit premises are needed. And the thing is, some people don't always think this is a fallacy. So the way one guy expresses it in the book that I recommended to you guys, called Informal Fallacies, or no, it's called I think it's called Informal Logic. Sorry, Informal Logic. Um, a lot of informal logic, the fallacies are matters of relevancy. Like, not formal fallacies are always fallacies, but informal fallacies aren't always fallacies, dependent on the relevancy. Is is used in in relevant context, as are most of these in their fallacies. Okay, so he shouldn't do that. This argument would not use the fallacy if there was, if there excuse me, if there were an implicit premise indicating that he is a person and that person should not torture other beings. But we see this all the time in, like, when people go from like a matter of fact to a matter of what ought to be. This happens in moral situation, like in certain moral discussions too. People go from what what is to what ought to be. So a good example, this is one of the examples of why a certain meta ethical theory isn't considered ethical at all, which is egoism. So egoism starts with the premise that comes from scientific psychology, which is called psychological egoism. Psychological egoism is the observation that people often act in their own self-interest. And then ethical egoism takes that fact of psychology, that people often act in their self-interest, and then draws the conclusion, well, people often act in their own self-interest, so therefore it is ethical or morally permissible for them to act in their self-interest. But obviously it doesn't. We can come up with at least 1,000 examples, if not more, of why acting in your own self-interest often doesn't lead to moral outcomes, ethical outcomes, right? And let me change my chat filter, make sure I'm getting all my chats, both good and bad. Yeah, there we go. And again, I apologize to everyone who was rocking with me like 5 minutes ago, and my live stream cut out. That happens. Sorry. So the next one is jump into conclusions, which is a good segue. So jump into conclusions. It's not always a mistake to make a quick decision, but when we draw a conclusion without taking the trouble to acquire enough of that relevant evidence, our reasoning commits the fallacy of jumping to conclusions, provided there was sufficient time to acquire and assess the extra evidence, and provided that the extra effort it takes to get the evidence isn't prohibitive. So making quick decisions can also, like, obviously isn't always a fallacy. That's a good way. Like, we were built to make quick decisions because that probably helped our ancestors survive in many certain situations. It becomes fallacious when we're given enough time to deliberate on something and instead we decide not to. And in doing so, um, we don't assess the evidence that we would need to establish the veracity of a claim. So an example is like, hey, this car is really cheap. I'll buy it. So I'll buy that for $1. But no, so hold on. Before concluding that you should buy it, ask yourself whether you need to buy another car, and if so, whether you should lease or rent or just borrow a car when you need to travel by car. Like just Uber it. So, but moving on to the next one, lack of proportion. This is a good one because, like I said, um, not only should you make sure that you have evidence to support your claims or the claims of others, but the evidence should be proportional to the claim. So the degree of assent you have towards a belief should be proportional to the evidence for it. So the fallacy of the lack of proportion occurs either by exaggerating or downplaying or simply not noticing a point that is a crucial step in a piece of reasoning. You exaggerate when you make a mountain out of a molehill. You downplay when you suppress relevant evidence. And this goes to back to the genetic fallacy, which I mentioned several days ago. The genetic fallacy blows the genesis of an idea out of proportion. All right, let me give a quick example, just so people understand what I'm saying here. So, did you hear about the tourists getting mugged in Russia last week? And then there was the awful train wreck last year just outside of Moscow, where 3 of the 25 persons unalived were tourists. I'll never visit Russia, but it might be many reasons not to visit Russia, but that's probably not one of them, right? So the speaker is blowing these isolated incidents out of proportion. Millions of tourists visit Russia with no problems, at least back then. Another example occurs when a speaker simply lacks the information needed to give a factor its proper proportional weight. Anyway, so line drawing. I did touch on this last time. I'll go back over this. So line drawing is if we improperly reject a vague claim because it is not as precise as we'd like, then we're using the line drawing fallacy. Being vague is not being hopelessly vague, also called the bald man fallacy, the fallacy of the heap, and the Sorites fallacy. Um, Let me give an example. So, uh, Dwayne can never go bald. Um, Dwayne isn't bald now. Don't you agree that if he loses one hair, that won't make him go from not bald to bald? And if he loses one hair after that, then this one loss too won't ha- won't make him go from not bald to bald. Therefore, no matter how much hair he loses, he can't become bald. No, no. if I think that's obvious, we can obviously see why that doesn't work, right? I hope. Anyway, loaded language is a good one. Loaded languages is emotive terminology that expresses value judgments. We all do this. We all do this, right? We're all guilty of this sometimes. We're all guilty of making this fallacy sometimes. I think we're all. But anyway, at least, even if we're all guilty of it, at least we can at least be aware of it so we do it less often. So, loaded language is emotive terminology that expresses value judgments when used in what appears to be an objective description. The terminology, unfortunately, can cause the listener to adopt those values when in fact no good reason has been given for doing so. It's also called prejudicial language, which you may have heard, you know, in reference to like watching some sort of you know, law show. Like like if you ever watch some court show, you might hear that term prejudicial language. So an example is you're watching the news and they say, well, in today's top stories, Senator Smith carelessly cast the deciding vote today to pass both the budget bill and the trailer bill to fund yet another excessive watchdog committee over coastal development. So this is a broadcast. This broadcast is really just an editorial posing as a news report, and this happens in the news all the time. A lot of the 24/7 hour news channels broadcast editorials posing as news reports, and all of them do it. All three major ones: MSNBC, CNN, Fox. What makes it what makes them obnoxious is the fact that you know, they mix news in with editorial, and then a lot of people can't know which from which. Especially older people. A lot of older people watch these 24-hour news programs because younger people don't watch this shit anymore. We get our news from the internet. Loaded questions. Asking a question in a way that unfairly presumes the answer. Oh, this is such a common one. This is one often talked about in law school too. The common loaded question is, "Have you stopped beating your wife yet?" It was like, "No." "Oh, so you still beating her?" "No, I mean, I'm, no, I'm not. I'm not beating her." "Oh, so you're not beating her anymore?" "What? What? No, no." "Oh, so you are still beating her?" You can't win with a loaded question. So the only way is to Kobayashi Maru that question and never answers in the first fucking place. So this fallacy occurs commonly in polls, especially push polls, which are polls designed to push information onto the person being polled and not designed to learn the person's views. We saw this on the election, right, back in November. Well, the whole year following up to November. Here's an example as far as like political loaded questions, right? So if you knew that candidate B was a liar and crook, substitute whoever you want for that. I'm keeping this. Would you support candidate A or instead candidate B, who is neither a liar nor a crook? Logic chopping. Uh, this is funny because a lot of us philosophy nerds take logic chopping actually as a badge of honor, but in this context, it is a fallacy. So logic chopping is obscuring the issue by using overly technical logical tools, overly technical logic tools, especially the techniques of formal symbolic logic that focus attention on trivial details, is a form of smokescreen and quibbling. True. Um, and it also gets to something I mentioned the other day when I did my live stream on meta atheism, and I referenced a fallacy that my former professor coined called the philosopher fallacy, which is someone who makes um, overly complex arguments in place of where just common sense reasoning will do. That that I think fits into this as well. Um, I'm gonna go down a list. Maybe this that might be mentioned here as well, but I'm pretty sure my professor George Ray coined that fallacy, or he got it from one of his professors. Um, so we talked about logical or formal fallacies last time, so I'm not gonna go over that because I spent a good amount of time on that in the beginning, middle, and end. Pause. Lying. Duh. Lying is a fallacy of reasoning that depends on intentionally saying. So some of you didn't know that lying is a fallacy. Is a type of logical fallacy. It is because you're deliberately being dishonest in a way to throw off the veracity of something, right? So anyway, so a lying is a fallacy of reasoning depends on intentionally saying something that is known to be false. If the lying occurs in an argument's premise, then it is an example of the fallacy of questionable premise. Now, I want to make it clear that um, that being honest and telling the truth are not synonymous with each other. Obviously, they overlap significantly, but they're not the same. And I gave the example last time about, you know, if you were harboring uh, people in your attic who were wanted by the SS, and they came knocking at your door saying, "Hey, do you have some Jews in your attic?" And you're like, "Oh no, sir, absolutely not. I don't put up with that. If they were here, I would turn them in right now and let you know, because, sir, mm-mm. I'm a good, I'm a good German, or I'm a good Frenchman. I would never, I would never harbor those folks." Then as soon as the secret police leave, you go up to the attic and like, "Hey, you guys all right? You guys good? He's gone. Ghost is clear. You can come down now." But I'm gonna make sure he. But wait, let me make sure he's gone. Now, was the person now? Did the person create? Do something immoral? Was it dishonest? He didn't tell the truth. Yes, but he wasn't. But was he being dishonest? As we see, honesty deals with intention. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up since we are referencing that lying is a form of a type of fallacy of reasoning. Okay, so an example: Abraham Lincoln, Theodore Roosevelt, and John Kennedy were assassinated. They were U.S. presidents. Therefore, at least three U.S. presidents have been assassinated. Roosevelt was never assassinated. So, get all right. We have the maldistributed middle, which is the same thing as called the undistributed middle. So let me go over that one for you guys. A lot of these have, a lot of these are, this, a lot of these fallacies have multiple names because they're so common that they go by many names. So the maldistributed middle, or also called the undistributed middle, is this. This is a formal fallacy. Okay, I told you we can't get away from formal fallacies. So in syllogistic logic means dealing with syllogisms. This was the type of logic uh, created by Aristotle. So, in syllogistic logic, failing to distribute the middle term over at least one of the other terms is the fallacy of undistributed middle. It's also called the fallacy of the maldistributed middle. So, an example is all collies are animals, all dogs are animals, therefore, all collies are dogs. Well, all collies are dogs, but that's not a valid syllogistic argument. So the middle term, animals, is the predicate of both universal affirmative premises and therefore is undistributed. The formal fallacy has the logical form all C are A, all D are A, therefore all C are D. Got it? I know, I know. Next one is many questions, also called the complex question. I'm pretty sure I went over this last time, but I'm gonna retread that territory. So the complex question is when you use this fallacy, um, when you frame a question so that some controversial presupposition is made by the wording of the question. Again, this is something that's talked about in law school because this is something that's often used by overly clever lawyers. I, if if you haven't caught this, I love legal reasoning, but I don't like lawyers. So probably because my father's one. Anyway, so an uh, an example is so a reporter so a reporter is asking the question, "Mr. President, are you going to continue your policy of wasting taxpayers' money on missile defense?" The question unfairly presumes the controversial claim that the policy really is a waste of money. The fallacy of complex question is a form of begging the question. Remember, I told you guys begging the question is my favorite fallacy. Begging the question is basically any argument or claim where you are basically presupposing what you ought to be proving. Um, all right, next one um, is, well, the misconditionalization, which is the modal fallacy. I don't think I went over this last time. I talked about modality, but I didn't talk about the modal fallacy last time. So, the modal fallacy, this is the era of treating modal conditionals as if the modality applies only to the then part of the conditional when it more properly applies to the entire conditional. Modal is, well, we'll get into that another day. So, let me let me let me give an example. So, James has two children. If James has two children, then he necessarily has more than one child. So it is necessarily true that James has more than one child. Did did you guys pick up where that's wrong? So this apparently valid argument is invalid. It is not necessarily true that James has more than one child. It's merely true that he has more than one child. He could have had no children. Duh. It is logically possible that James has no children even though he actually has two. The solution to the fallacy is to see that the premise of James has two children, even though he actually has two. I mean, I'm sorry. I misstated that. Sorry. The solution to the fallacy is to see that the premise if James has two children, then he necessarily has more than one child requires the modality necessarily to apply logically to the entire conditional. If James has two children, then he has more than one child, even though grammatically it applies only to he has more than one child. The modal fallacy is the most well known of the infinitely many errors involving modal concepts. Modal concepts include necessarily, possibly, and so forth. You don't have to get it. So, modal logic is a whole different thing. This modal logic, even though it's a part of first order logic, it's sort of like that. It's not the baby logic. Like, baby logic is basically like propositional logic, where you don't deal with modality. Okay. Um, Hold on, let me make this bigger so it makes it easier for me to read. Hold on, I forgot how I made this bigger last time. Pause. But I was about to try to squeeze and stretch out the screen. I'm forgetting I'm using a old ass desktop computer where I can't do that with the screen. How did I make the screen bigger last time? I think I was using the same browser. Let me just zoom in. I mean zoom out. Sorry. There we go. All right, that's better. Mm. All right, guys. So getting the misleading accent. I've already went over this again. I'm gonna go over this again. The accent fallacy is a type of ambiguity. Remember, I said there was three types of ambiguities. You had um, ambiguity dealing with semantics, with well, anyway, let me get into this type. The accent of fallacy is a fallacy of ambiguity due to the different ways a word or syllable is emphasized or accented. It's also called accentus, misleading accent, or prosody. You might have heard one of these before. If not, you're learning something new. Congratulations. So, an example is a member of Congress is asked by a reporter if she is in favor of the president's new missile defense system. They use this a lot. And she responds, well, I'm in favor of a missile defense system that effectively defends America. America, bitch. So I'm joking, but no. So with an emphasis on the word favor, her response is likely to be for the president's missile defense system. With an emphasis instead on the word effectively, her remark is likely to be against the president's missile defense system. And by using neither emphasis, she can later claim that her response was on either side of the issue. So, for an example of the fallacy of accent involving the accent of a syllable within a single word, consider the word invalid in the sentence. Did you mean the invalid one? Oh, yeah, that's a good one. So, when we accent the first syllable, we are speaking of a sick person, invalid. But when we accent the second syllable, we are speaking of an argument failing to meet the deductive standard of being valid, invalid. So by not supplying the accent and not supplying additional information to help us disambiguate, then we are committing the fallacy of accent. Got it? Good. We're not going to go over that again. But I really hate ambiguous language because people do this shit all the time. Misleading vividness. Oh yeah. So this is when the fallacy of jumping to conclusions is due to a special emphasis on an anecdote or other piece of evidence, then the fallacy of misleading vividness has occurred. So, yes, I read the side of the cigarette pack about smoking being harmful to your health. That's the Surgeon General's opinion, him and all his statistics. But let me tell you about my uncle. Oh boy. Uncle Harry has smoked cigarettes for 40 years now, and he's never been sick a day in his life. Cap. I call Cap. Cap. But he won a ski race at Lake Tahoe in his age group last year. You should have seen him zip down the mountain. He smoked a cigarette during the award ceremony, and he had a broad smile on his face. It's probably rigor mortis, but no. But I was really proud. I can still remember the cheering. Cigarette smoking can't be as harmful as people say. Yeah, tell that to my dead stepfather. Anyway, the Vivek anecdote is the story about Uncle Harry. Too much emphasis is placed on it and not enough on the statistics from the Surgeon General. Enough said. Misplaced concreteness. So, mistakenly supposing that something is a concrete object with independent evidence when it's not. This is also known as the fallacy of reification and the fallacy of hypothesization. Blame Darius ever Greek works of. Are you is the Great Works of Philosophy? Are you talking about it as a book called Great Works of Philosophy, or you just mean generally have I read Great Works of Philosophy? As well, yeah, because if you're, if you do philosophy as a in college, whether it's an undergrad or grad, you have to read stuff like that. But no, I haven't read a book called Great Works of Philosophy. So anyway, so an example of misplaced concreteness is there are two footballs lying on the floor of an otherwise empty room. When asked to count all the objects in the room, John says there are three: the two balls plus the group of two. So John mistakenly supposed a group or set of concrete objects as also a concrete object. A less metaphysical example would be this, right? Because that might went over some of your heads. Like he counted the set of objects as an object itself, right? That's misplaced concreteness. But here's another example. John says a criminal was caught by canine aid and therefore supposed that canine aid was some sort of concrete object. But John could have expressed the same point less misleadingly by saying a canine dog aided in catching a criminal. Ren 1010. But no. The misplaced burden of proof. Oh, this is a favorite one of online debates. The misplaced burden of proof. This happens so many times in online arguments. I'm pretty sure most of you have done this at least once. I know I have. I'm guilty of it as well. So, committing the error of trying to get someone else to prove you are wrong when it is your responsibility to prove you are correct. I'm going to say that again. Committing the error of trying to get someone else to prove you are wrong when it is your responsibility to prove you are correct. An example is person A says, I saw a green alien from outer space. Person B says, what? Can you prove it? And person A says, you can't prove I didn't. So if someone says, I saw a green alien from outer space, you probably should ask for some proof. If the person responds with no more than something like, well, prove I didn't, then they are not accepting their burden of proof and are improperly trying to place it on your shoulders. And let's be honest, almost all of us have done this at some point in some argument, or especially online. Probably did it today on Facebook, didn't you? Misrepresentation. So, yes, this is a fallacy. So, if the misrepresentation occurs on purpose, then it's an example of lying. We already said that lying is a fallacy of reasoning, right? So, if the misrepresentation occurs during a debate in which there's a misrepresentation of the opponent's claims, then it would be the cause of a straw man fallacy, which I went over before as well. Straw man fallacy is when you intentionally distort someone's claim or argument and then defeat the claim that they never made. So we went over missing the point, which is also called a relevant conclusion. We went over mob appeal, which is also called appeal to the people. I want to go over that again though, because that's such an important one. I really want to do that again. So appeal to the people is when you suggest too strongly that someone's claim or argument is correct simply because it's what most everyone believes. Then your reasoning contains the fallacy of the appeal to people. Similarly, if you suggest too strongly that someone's claim or argument is mistaken simply because it's not what most everyone believes, then your reason also uses the fallacy. Get some water. I'm sorry. It's better. Gotta hydrate, guys. So, agreement with popular opinion. Again, let me say it again. Agreement with popular opinion is not necessarily a reliable sign of truth, and deviation from popular opinion is not necessarily a reliable sign of error. But if you assume it is and do so with enthusiasm, then you are using this fallacy. It's essentially the same as the fallacies of ad numerum, which means to the numbers. Appeal to the gallery, appeal to the masses, argument from popularity, also called argumentum ad populum. Common practice, mob appeal, past practice, peer pressure, and traditional wisdom. The too strongly mentioned above is important in the description of the fallacy because what most everyone believes is, for that reason, somewhat likely to be true, all things considered, or ceteris paribus, right? You always had this, one of my professors, well, two of my professors, the guy I mentioned earlier, George Ray, and one of my professors who's both in philosophy and in the linguistics department. I was a triple major, so I had him in both departments in linguistics and in philosophy. They made a whole argument, which you can actually find on the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy online, if you want to, on the ceteris paribus clause. All right, and they argue why the ceteris paribus clause is kind of built into all scientific laws. Anyway, that's getting back to this. So, however, the fallacy occurs when the degree of support. So, however, the fallacy occurs, the appeal to the people, when when this degree of support is overestimated. So an example is you should turn to channel 6. It's the most watched channel this year. Or for us, let's say you should watch Netflix. It's the most watched live stream this year. I mean, sorry, the most watched streaming service. And well, this is fallacious because of its implicitly accepting the questionable premise that the most watched channel this year is, for that reason alone, the best channel for you. If you stress the idea of appealing to a new idea held by the gallery, masses, mob, peers, people, and so forth, then it is a bandwagon fallacy. Okay. So I'll put a different spin on what we talked about last time. Good, good. I already went over modal fallacy. Oh, Monte Carlo. So Monte Carlo is a version of the gambler's fallacy. I do want to go over the gambler's fallacy again because this is something that too many people make, especially when it refers not just gamblers, but let's let's be honest. Most guys are sports fans, right? Most of us are sports fans. Most of you watched the Super Bowl. I didn't. I didn't even watch the halftime show, so I don't know if the halftime show was overrated or not. Don't ask me. But what I noticed is a lot of sports fans listen to these um these sports news outlets, usually on ESPN and stuff like that. And a lot of these sports newscasters often make the gambler's fallacy. One of those examples is like the hot streak. That's an example. Um, but let me just go over the gambler's fallacy for you guys real quick again. So this occurs when a gambler falsely assumes that the history of outcomes will affect the future outcomes. Like I said, like believing that this athlete is having a hot streak, right? So, and last time I went over the example of a fair coin toss. So I won't go over that again. Name calling, that's a form of an ad hominem. I'm not going to go over that again. I went over ad hominems many times. Ad hominem means attack, is a personal attack. It means ad hominem means to the man or to the person, right? Where you're attacking the person instead of their argument or their claim that they're making. That should be an obvious fallacy for most all of us, even if we have no training in logic, in any sort of philosophy or critical thinking. Is just common sense that attacking someone instead of attacking the claim that they made is just fallacious. The naturalistic fallacies. I already brought this up. That this is another version of this is this is a version of the is ought fallacy. So when a broad interpretation of this fallacy, it applies to any attempt to argue from an is to an ought. That is, from a list of facts to a conclusion about what ought to be done. So let me give another example for this, because this is like again, this is important because a lot of this is used in a lot of bad thinking on either morality or science or both. Some people try to try to draw a moral conclusion from an epical from excuse me from an empirical premise. So here's one. So because women are naturally capable of bearing and nursing children while men are not, women ought to be the primary caregivers of children. Here's another example. Owners of financially successful companies are more successful than poor people in the competition for wealth, power, and social status. Hmm. Has this come up in recently? Um, so therefore, the poor deserve to be poor. Have we heard this anytime recently, soon, whatever? No. Hmm. So there's considerable disagreement among philosophers regarding what sorts of arguments the term naturalistic fallacy legitimately applies to, and, and that's a legitimate concern because again, Not all is art reasoning is fallacious. It depends on it depends on the context. Like I said, a lot of these the difference between formal I would say the largest difference between formal fallacies and informal fallacies, aside from one is based merely on the form of an argument or claim, is that informal fallacies normally have to do with the relevancy of the context. Okay. Um, here's a new one. We have neglecting a common cause. So the common cause fallacy occurs during causal reasoning when a causal connection between two kinds of events is claimed when evidence is available indicating that both are the effect of a common cause. This is something we also talk about often in behavioral and social sciences. That we'll say that you know people will think that A causes B or maybe B causes A. Meanwhile, both of them are actually caused by a third variable. So So an example is noting that the auto accident rate rises and falls with the rate of use of windshield wipers. One concludes the use of wipers is somehow causing auto accidents. So I did go over this last time, but obviously it's the rain that's the common cause of both, right? So I went over this last time. I wasn't sure or not, but I don't mind repeating that one because it's often used. No middle ground, example of the false dilemma, also called the false dichotomy, also called the black or white fallacy. I went over that last time, not doing that again because I think that one should be apparent. The no true Scotsman. Didn't go over this before, but I did go over the ad hoc rescue. This is a type of the ad hoc rescue. So, because this is a subset of ad hoc rescue, I'm going to go over it. So, this error occurs um, well, the No True Scotsman era is a kind of ad hoc rescue of one's generalization in which the reasoner recharacterizes the situation solely in order to escape the refutation of the generalization. So Smith says all Scotsmen are loyal and brave. Jones says, but McDougal over there is a Scotsman, and he was arrested by his commanding officer for running from the enemy. Smith says, well, if that's right, it just shows that McDougal wasn't a true Scotsman. I wish I could do a Scottish brogue because it would sound so much funnier doing. But I'm sorry, I can't. I'm not very good at a Scottish accent. The closest to Scottish I can think of is like Scrooge McDuck and his nemesis Glumgold. Glumgold, I like Glumgold anyway. But again, the No True Scotsman is a version of an ad hoc claim. An ad hoc claim will try to save something by just recharacterizing the situation. So, um, non causa pro causa. Um, this is another version of the false cause. This label is Latin for mistaking the non cause for the cause. And I went over false cause last time, so I want to go over that again. It's just basically improperly concluding that one thing is a cause of another, right? Non sequitur, we definitely went over that 2 times last time when we did the fallacies. But just to go over it really quickly again, and I just went over it earlier as well, is when a conclusion is supported only by extremely weak reasons or by irrelevant reasons. Then the argument is fallacious and said to be a non sequitur. Um, oh, I like this one. This is a good one. Obscurum per obscurius. This is a fallacy. I never thought of it as a fallacy, but it is a bad way of thinking. I've usually heard this term used in philosophy only in terms of other philosophy. Usually, we it was a way of us. Uh, it was often a way of dismissing continental philosophy because we would say that often pe- people in continental philosophy like a lot of the 19th century, which a lot of people consider the dark ages of philosophy. A lot of people consider considered the 19th century philosophy like important philosophy in the continental um, on the continental side of philosophy simply for its obscurity. so so obscurum per obscurius is explaining something obscure by mysterious or mysterious by something that is even more obscure or more mysterious. Sorry. Here's an example. So let me explain what a lucky result is. It is a fortuitous collapse of the quantum mechanical wave packet that leads to a surprisingly pleasing result. What? This is how some people talk, especially people who are into new age quackery. Like they here's the thing. Anytime someone has to start using quantum mechanics to explain some something that has nothing whatsoever to do with physics, you know they're talking bullshit. If someone starts explaining what their beliefs about consciousness by referring to quantum mechanics, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about, and you know they didn't fucking even take any physics. Because I've taken physics, no, and we don't even talk about quantum stuff until we have to. Most of the time, philosophers are, I mean, sorry, most of the time, physicists are just happy enough using classical mechanics when they, except when they need to do the the, the quantum work, or like in the MCU when they were making fun of it on Ant-Man. He was like, "Do you just call everything quantum?" So yeah. The next one is one-sidedness, and this this is another version of confirmation bias, slanting, or suppressed evidence. It speaks for itself. One-sidedness, like you're only looking at one side of the issue. Opposition is being opposed to someone's reasoning because of who they are, usually because of what group they are associated with. It's also called, often related to the fallacy of guilt by association or the genetic fallacy. But how many people make this mistake when they get into debates with people online? You merely dislike something because of person person of because of who they are. Like, let's put into example the current president. A lot of a lot of the executive orders he's issued were things that previous administrations on the opposite political side were for as well. But because he's for it, now people are in opposition to it merely because he's the one issuing the executive order. So they're merely against it because Trump is issuing it, even though this was something, even though it might have been something that that Obama was for or Clinton was for. Okay. Um, we also saw this during the pandemic, right? The when so people many people who oppose Trump or who are Democrats, liberals, and progressives, when Trump was still in office, he came up with the vaccine, and a lot of people who were Democratic voters, who were liberals and progressives, said they weren't going to take it because they didn't trust him. And then, as soon as his administration ended, and the very same vaccines by the same pharmaceutical companies was being issued, and the then former President Biden, then at the same time, was recommending everyone take these to reduce the spread of the of the virus. Then all of a sudden, everyone on Team Blue was like, "We got to do this, guys. We need to get these vaccines. We need to you need to get your booster shots as well." And all, like, everyone was for the very same stuff that Trump was recommending people take as well, but because he issued it, they were opposed to it. Got it. Vortex says, I noticed that Trump supporters' ideas are often laced with logical fallacies. You just made a logical fallacy yourself, but you don't even see it. So moving on. um, Overfitting. That's a version of curve fitting, guys. I went over that last time. I'm not gonna really, I'm not gonna go over it again. I'm just gonna say curve fitting is the process of constructing a curve that has the best fit to a series of data points. So I'm not gonna go over that again. Overgeneralization is also called a sweeping generalization, or also a fallacy by accident, which is when you arrive at a generalization but you don't or can't list all the exceptions. Okay. Oversimplification. Pretty sure I went over this one last time. Um, you oversimplify when you cover up relevant complexities or make a complicated problem appear to be too much simpler than it really is. So I'm about to end this. Is about 1 o'clock. I'm gonna go over like maybe two more. Then I'm gonna end this. So, an example of oversimplification: President Bush wants our country to trade with Fidel Castro's communist Cuba. I say there should be a trade embargo against Cuba. The issue in our election is Cuban trade, and if you are against it, then you should vote for me for president. So, whom to vote for should be decided by considering quite a number of issues in addition to the Cuban trade. When the oversimplification results in falsely implying that a minor causal factor is the major one, then the reasoning also uses the false cause fallacy. Let me um, past practice, which is the same thing as the appeal to traditional wisdom. I want to go over this again because, like I said, too many people, even some people I'm friends with here, use the fallacy of traditional wisdom. Like when we were talking about Chinese philosophy and we were going over, I was going over the major Chinese philosophies, and I was mentioning Taoism, Confucianism, and Chan Buddhism, which is a version of Buddhism that was developed in China and became known as Zen Buddhism more commonly, but it's called Chan Buddhism there. And then I mentioned some other stuff, and one of my moderators brought up, um, well, no, I think I brought it up originally, and then we kind of debated that, and we can have debates. It was a, I think it was a debate in good faith. But I was saying that at the time that moderator I think was appealing to traditional folk wisdom, and that's a type of fallacy. Um, and claiming that that Chinese folklore was philosophy, and I was like, no, that's pseudoscience. And then we got off task when she claimed that it was not everything is not every bit of knowledge is science. I'm like, I never claimed that. I was just saying it's pseudoscience. It's not philosophy either. It's not philosophy. It's not science. It's just pseudoscience. Something is pseudoscience when it's been falsified more than once and people still use it as if it's some sort of empirical science, or that it has like some some sort of scientific or empirical basis to it when it doesn't, because it's been already debunked. So and the example I was using there was what is the name of that? Let me give me a second here. The, you want to separate Chinese folk beliefs from like religion, which is kind of entwined, unfortunately. But I was saying it was fortune telling is Chinese fortune telling was pseudoscience. with the Qing, not the I Ching. Each with those are folk beliefs. I Ching, Bakwa, Xing, the Xing Yi, which are also kung fu styles, internal so-called internal kung fu styles. But in any case, like I was saying, some of these Chinese folk beliefs, I was saying, don't didn't count properly as philosophy in the strong sense of philosophy that I was using at that time. Okay, give me a second. Let me look up something. Just looking this up, guys. Um, Your boy can type with one hand pretty fast. But yeah, so anyway, at that time when we were talking about Chinese folk beliefs, we were talking about feng shui. And like I said, feng shui just isn't Chinese philosophy, it's just pseudoscience. And the defense of feng shui and other sorts of things like that is an appeal to true traditional wisdom. So if you say or imply that a practice must be okay today simply because it has been apparently wise practice in the past, then your reasoning contains the fallacy of traditional wisdom. Procedures that are being practiced and that have a tradition of being practiced might or might not be able to be given a good justification. But merely saying that they have been practiced in the past is not always good enough, in which the fallacy is present. And it's also called the argumentum consensus gentium, when the traditional wisdom is that of nations. So um, I'm gonna give one last one, then I'm gonna end this, guys. The pathetic fallacy. I like this one. The pathetic fallacy is a mistaken belief due to attributing a peculiarly human qualities to inanimate objects, but not to animals. Uh, so I'll dig over this before because it's also called anthropomorphism. But anthropomorphism, when not, it's also called the Disney fallacy or the Walt Disney fallacy, obviously, because what are they best at? Anthropomorphizing animals to make them more human-like, so we feel more attached to them. And that's also called the pathetic fallacy, mistaken belief due to attributing peculiarly human qualities to inanimate objects, but not to animals. But when it is attributed to animals, it's called like the Disney fallacy, Walt Disney fallacy, whatever, whatever. So someone says, "Arg, it won't start again. This old car always breaks down on days when I have a job interview." You ever hear people talk like that? They say it must be afraid that if I get a new job, then I'll be able to afford a replacement, so it doesn't want me to get to my interview on time. I've literally hear people talk this way all the time. Not necessarily about their cars, but I hear people say shit like this all the time at work and everywhere. Like they'll be referring to anything, their shoes, their car, like their their little bum leg. I don't know, just all sorts of dumb stuff. So let me do another one since I went over that last time, even though at least I put a different spin on it. I already went over peer pressure last time. That's the appeal to the people. We just went over that argumentum ad populum. The persuasive definition. So when some people try to win their arguments by getting you to accept their faulty definition, like some people were doing in this chat room. So some people trying to win their arguments by getting you to accept their faulty definition. If you buy into their definition, they've practically persuaded you already. Same as the definist fallacy. Um, Poison in the well, when presenting a definition, will be an example of using a persuasive definition. And poison in the well, guys, is the fallacy of um, when you preemptively attack a person in order to discredit their testimony or argument in advance of them giving it. That's poison in the well. So when you do that, when presenting a definition, that's the use of a persuasive definition. An example is, let's define a Democrat as a leftist who desires to overtax the corporations and abolish freedom in the economic sphere. We've heard that on the right, of course, right? um, Again, so most people think I'm all the way completely on the right. I'm not. Then some people say I'm all the way on the left. I'm not. I prefer reason to guide my my beliefs. I get a lot of things wrong, but yeah. But yeah, that's a good example. I could use I should use also a Republican example to balance things out, but I don't think that's necessary. So I'm gonna end this here, guys. It's late, and I want to get like a late night snack before I go to bed to help me go to sleep. So that's it. I might continue this again if you guys want. I mean, I went through most of them, but there's a few we could still go over just for the sake of being complete. If you guys want me to finish all of these out for the sake of completeness, then let me know in the comment section. If you want to support me, you can become a member, um, or you can leave me a super thanks or a gift. When I say gift, I don't mean actually sending me a physical gift. I mean the gifts that are on here if you're on the live streams. When you're on my live streams, you can send me gifts in the form of gems. But if you're watching this broadcast on replay, a super thanks will do memberships. You can also go into the links in the description and buy me a coffee or send me a cash app if you want to show support. If not, I just ask you like and subscribe and share. So I appreciate that, guys. Tony's Coffee says interesting. Just sub. Thank you for the info. Thank you. Appreciate it. And again, this is part three of a of something I've been doing within the late night philosophy discussions, which is logical fallacies. If you guys want me to complete the rest of this, um, let me know in the comments. Appreciate it, guys. And if you have any questions, also you can leave that in the comment section. If people need to reach out to me for like more in-depth conversation, my email is available as well. So with that, I'm out, guys. Thank you. Have a good night. A good day to the rest of you on the other side of the world. Thank you. Peace.